The morning hustle had just begun at the gleaming Zenith Tower, home to one of the city's most successful tech companies. Employees poured through the glass doors in tailored suits, tapping away at phones, sipping overpriced coffee. The polished, marble floors reflected their busy steps, and the front desk buzzed with activity. Among the stream of professionals, a woman entered quietly. Older, hunched slightly, with gray curls tucked beneath a faded knit cap. Her coat was worn at the edges, her shoes scuffed from years of use. A cloth tote bag hung from her shoulder, frayed and heavy. She moved with purpose, though her appearance sharply contrasted with the building's modern, upscale aura. Behind the reception desk, Bryce noticed her immediately. Young, muscular, and proud of his uniform, he straightened up like a hawk spotting prey. His eyebrows furrowed, and a smirk slowly crept across his face. "Hey, you can't be in here," he called out loudly, stepping around the counter. The woman turned to him calmly. "I have a meeting upstairs." Bryce let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Ma'am, this is a corporate building. You can't. Just walk in off the street. The soup kitchen is 2 blocks down." Her expression didn't change. She stood still, neither angry nor offended, just quietly watching him. He moved closer, raising his voice. "I'm not joking. You need to leave, now. People like you can't just wander around in here." A few employees paused, glancing awkwardly in their direction. Some whispered. Others looked away, pretending not to notice. But no one intervened. "I said," Bryce repeated, louder this time, "you're not allowed in this building unless you work here or have an appointment. Which, clearly, you don't." "I do," she replied softly. "I was told to arrive by 8. He snorted. "Right, and I'm the CEO." She looked him in the eye. "Are you sure you want to do this?" That made him pause for a beat. Then he laughed again, louder this time, to cover his uncertainty. "Oh, now you're threatening me? Look, lady, I don't care what story you've made up in your head. You're not going upstairs. You're lucky I'm not calling the cops." She nodded slightly, as if understanding something deeper than what was happening on the surface. Then, without another word, she took a small step back toward the door. Bryce, puffed up with satisfaction, followed her to ensure she left. "You people always think you can just—" His sentence trailed off as the lobby elevator chimed behind them. A young woman in business attire stepped out, scanning the area until her eyes landed on the older woman. Her face lit up. "Mrs. Green," she called out warmly. "You're early," the older woman turned, offering a gentle smile. "Just a bit." The young woman walked over quickly and took her arm, guiding her away from the door. "We've been preparing the boardroom. Everyone's excited to meet you." Bryce froze, his posture straightened, and his face drained of color. "Wait, what did you say?" he asked, stumbling over his words. The young employee glanced at him, confused. "This is Eleanor Green. She founded the company. She's our CEO." Bryce stared at the woman he had just tried to throw out, his mouth opening slightly but no words forming. She didn't even look at him. She simply followed the employee toward the elevator, leaving him standing like a statue in his pressed uniform, realization sinking deeper with every step she took away from him. Someone nearby whispered, "He's so screwed." The elevator doors slid shut, and Bryce was left in silence, surrounded by the very people who had heard every word he said. A tense hush settled over the lobby of Zenith Tower after the elevator doors closed. Bryce remained rooted to the spot, heart pounding in his chest. The sting of embarrassment hadn't fully hit yet. It was still climbing up his spine like a cold shiver. Employees hurried past him, casting sideways glances but saying nothing. Their silence spoke louder than any words. His mind raced to make sense of what had just happened. That couldn't have been the same woman he insulted. The woman in the ragged coat couldn't possibly be the CEO. Yet the young assistant had called her Eleanor Green, and she hadn't corrected her. Bryce stepped behind the front desk, hands trembling slightly. He pulled up the staff intranet on the screen and typed the name. Eleanor Green. A company page loaded, showing a recent photo of the founder standing beside investors, her gray curls slightly shorter but unmistakable. He stared at the screen. His stomach turned. Moments ago, he had mocked her clothing, shoved her toward the exit, treated her like she didn't belong. And all along, she had built the empire whose floors he was guarding. Upstairs, on the 20th floor, the atmosphere was entirely different. The large boardroom gleamed with glass walls, brushed steel accents, and a panoramic view of the city skyline. Around a long oval table, senior executives were already seated, murmuring about quarterly goals and new contracts. When the double doors opened, conversation stopped. The assistant entered first, followed by Eleanor, still wearing her same coat and worn shoes. The room went completely silent for a beat too long. A few confused glances exchanged between board members. One or two looked surprised, even skeptical. Eleanor walked to the head of the table, pulled out the chair herself, and sat down. "Good morning," she said calmly. The CFO cleared his throat. "Ma'am, do you want to change first? We weren't expecting you to arrive dressed." "I dressed exactly how I intended," she interrupted. "I wanted to observe how our employees treat people who don't look like they matter." A hush swept across the room again. She scanned the table slowly, her eyes sharp despite her gentle voice. "Today," she continued, "I was mistaken for a homeless woman. I was insulted, pushed toward the exit, called a nuisance. This happened in the lobby of the company I built." The COO shifted in his seat. We're very sorry to hear that. I'm not telling you this to get an apology. I'm telling you because culture starts at the top. If our gatekeepers treat people like trash based on appearances, how do you think clients are handled when no one's watching? Her words landed with weight. A few board members lowered their eyes. No one dared respond. Back downstairs, Bryce couldn't sit still. He kept checking the clock, waiting for something. An email, a phone call, a second chance. Nothing came. Around noon, a stern-looking man in a dark suit approached the desk. "Bryce McMillan?" Bryce stood up. "Yes, sir." "Come with me." He followed him past the elevators into a side hallway he'd never entered before. They walked in silence until they reached a small HR conference room. Inside sat two people, one from Human Resources, the other from Security Management. "The door closed. We reviewed the footage," said the HR representative without preamble. "It aligns with the incident report submitted this morning." Bryce tried to speak. "I didn't know who she was. I thought—" "You assumed," interrupted the woman from HR. "You made loud, inappropriate remarks. You physically pushed her toward the door. You embarrassed the founder of this company in front of staff." "I didn't mean any harm," he said quickly, sweating now. "I swear, if I'd known—" "But that's the problem," the man from security said firmly. "Respect shouldn't be conditional. You don't get to decide who deserves it based on their appearance." Bryce's chest tightened. "Please, I've worked here for 2 years. I've never had a complaint before." "We appreciate your service," said the HR rep gently, "but the decision has been made. Your employment is terminated effective immediately." The words echoed inside his skull. "Fired." Just like that. For something he hadn't even considered a mistake until a few hours ago. They handed him a plain white envelope. Severance, paperwork. A non-disclosure agreement. He signed in a daze, then was escorted to collect his belongings. The walk back through the lobby felt longer than usual. People didn't look away this time. They stared openly. By late afternoon, word had spread through every department. Employees who had seen the incident whispered about it in break rooms and group chats. Some were shocked. Others weren't surprised at all. In the executive suite, Eleanor sat in her office sipping black coffee. The assistant who had welcomed her that morning now stood by the door. "You want me to call a car for you, ma'am?" Eleanor smiled. "No need. I walked here. I'll walk back." "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I've always believed in walking among the people. It teaches you things polished boardrooms never will." Then she stood, picked up her tote bag, and headed toward the elevator. The staff parted as she walked through the lobby again, this time with quiet respect. Not because she looked different, but because they now knew who she was. She paused near the entrance, looked over the room, and then stepped outside into the fading daylight without a single word. Eleanor's footsteps echoed softly along the pavement as she walked away from the towering building that bore her legacy. The sun had begun to dip beneath the skyline, casting long shadows across the streets. Her pace was steady, her expression unreadable. Beneath the same coat Bryce had scoffed at, she carried more than just fabric. She carried memories, hard lessons, and the quiet weight of a truth too many still refused to see. She didn't head home immediately. Instead, she strolled into a modest corner cafe tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat. The place smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. A few people glanced up when she entered but quickly returned to their laptops and notebooks. She ordered a tea, took a seat by the window, and watched the city breathe outside. Across town, Bryce sat alone in his small apartment. A box of belongings from his desk sat untouched on the table. His uniform badge rested on top. He stared at it for a long time before tossing it into a drawer. The apartment felt colder than usual, or maybe he was just noticing its emptiness for the first time. His phone buzzed with a message from a friend who worked in maintenance. "Bro, that woman really owns the company?" Bryce didn't reply. He thought back to his own childhood. Raised in a working-class neighborhood, he'd always been told to dress sharp, act tough, and never let anyone question his worth. That mindset had served him on the streets, but now it had cost him something more valuable: his integrity. Across the city, whispers of Eleanor's unannounced visit had spread far beyond office walls. Online forums buzzed with discussion. A blurry snapshot of her in the lobby had been posted anonymously, captioned, "The real boss in disguise." Comments flooded in, some admiring, others skeptical, and many outraged by the way she had been treated. The story gained traction. News outlets began inquiring. But Eleanor refused interviews. She didn't want to turn a personal moment into public spectacle. For her, this wasn't about headlines. It was about culture, responsibility, and the choices people made when no one was watching. 2 days later, Eleanor returned to the office, this time dressed in a crisp navy suit. Her hair was tied back, her presence commanding. The same staff, who had seen her in worn shoes, now stood a little straighter when she passed. No grand speeches were made. She simply resumed work, quietly but purposefully. In the following weeks, changes began to ripple through the company. An anonymous evaluation system was introduced where employees could report mistreatment without fear of retaliation. The front desk underwent new training protocols, less about authority, more about empathy. Eleanor insisted on regular walkthroughs of every floor, speaking with people who rarely got the spotlight. Janitors, interns, delivery. Personnel. She listened. She learned. And she acted. Meanwhile, Bryce spent his days searching for work. Rejection emails filled his inbox. Interviews were brief and cold. His confidence crumbled under the weight of his own mistake. Late one evening, he opened a notebook and began to write. Not a resume, but a letter. Not to ask for his job back, but to acknowledge what he'd done. He mailed it without expectation. Just words on paper, folded neatly, and sent to someone who had every right to ignore him. Eleanor received the envelope a week later. She read it alone in her office. The handwriting was careful. The tone was humble. In the letter, Bryce admitted his arrogance. He spoke of the assumptions he'd carried his whole life, the way appearances had always guided his decisions. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He simply wanted her to know that he understood now, that he would do better, even if she never responded. She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer beside her desk. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number. 2 weeks later, Bryce stood in front of the same building he had once guarded, wearing plain clothes and no badge. He hadn't been asked to return as a security guard. Instead, Eleanor had invited him to join a new pilot program, a community outreach initiative focused on hiring and training people from underserved backgrounds. He hesitated at the entrance before stepping inside. This time, no one looked down on him. The receptionist smiled and guided him to a meeting room where a small group was gathered, including a woman in a wheelchair, a young man with face piercings, and an older gentleman with a thick accent. The facilitator entered, introduced herself, and began the session with a single sentence. Your value is not determined by your clothes, your past, or your title, but by how you treat others. Bryce listened closely. Weeks turned into months. The initiative grew, gaining attention from other companies. Eleanor continued her quiet leadership, never chasing applause, only results. Employees noticed the shift. The atmosphere felt lighter, more respectful. People talked more openly, shared more honestly. The walls didn't just hold a company anymore, they held a community. On the one-year anniversary of the incident, Eleanor was invited to speak at a leadership summit. She stood before a crowd of executives and CEOs, all waiting for her polished, corporate speech. But she spoke from memory instead. I walked into my own building one morning wearing a coat that told a different story, she began, and someone believed that story more than they believed in my humanity. That moment wasn't about me. It was about all the times people are unseen, unheard, and unwelcome because of how they look. She paused, letting her words sink in. We talk about innovation, disruption, growth. But none of that matters if we lose sight of decency. Kindness isn't weakness. It's a responsibility. The room stood in ovation. Outside the hall, Bryce stood watching from a monitor. He didn't need applause. He didn't need his old job. He just needed that reminder every day to see people for who they were, not what they wore. Eleanor walked off stage without a spotlight. Her work wasn't finished, but she had sparked something. An idea that respect shouldn't be earned by appearances, but offered freely by default. And that idea, simple yet powerful, changed more than one life. It changed the world around them.